I think, the first point I want to make is that suffering is not good in itself, right? So we're not
Mm-hmm.
saying that you should seek out suffering.
Right.
It's just that suffering can lead to growth if you process it, as you mentioned. You have to work
Yeah.
through it and process it. And why does this happen? Well, I think it's because suffering is a way of sort of loosening our grip on unhealthy, implicit or gut level beliefs
Yeah.
about ourselves, about God, about how the world works. And
Mm-hmm.
that creates the potential to shift them, which sometimes is not there otherwise, right? So sometimes something has to sort of shake us up to allow those deep beliefs to start to shift.
Mm.
So, so I think the first, step when we encounter suffering is our instinctual reaction oftentimes is understandably to try to get rid of suffering as quickly as possible and completely avoid it, right? I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
normal and understandable, but I think we need to cultivate a mindset when we encounter suffering of viewing suffering as an opportunity to grow. So that's kind of a first step, right? If you don't have that
Mm-hmm.
mindset or see that, you're just going to be avoiding it, pushing it away, right? And
Yeah.
that'll lead to some unhealthy ways of coping. So then the question, to your question, Marcus, how do we suffer well?
Mm-hmm.
And I do talk about this in the book. There's a couple of
Mm-hmm.
points, and it's unpacked more in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the first point would be bring our suffering to God. We need to bring our
Mm.
suffering to God. We're entrusted to God. This is modeled for us by Jesus in Scripture. In First Peter chapter 2, Peter tells us that Jesus kept entrusting his suffering
Mm-hmm.
to God, and it's interesting. It's an ongoing verb tense. It's not just a one-time thing that he kept entrusting
Mm.
his suffering to God, and so that's a model for us. We need to bring our suffering to God. And
Mm.
again, our instinctual reaction oftentimes is to move away from God, sometimes to blame God, and so we need to kind of fight that and try to bring our suffering to God. And
Mm-hmm.
Scripture helps us in the form of lament, and I talk about that in
Mm.
the book
Mm-hmm.
as well. That lament is, 40% of the Psalms are lament. You
Yeah.
would never know that by attending our churches,
Right.
for the
Right.
most
That's
part, right?
true.
We tend to avoid those, but 40% of the
Yeah.
Psalms are lament. And so lament, really, you can think of it as a framework for meaning making. So it's a
Yeah.
stylized form of speech that
Hmm.
has common elements with a specific trajectory. And so those elements are an address to God,
Yeah.
a pouring out of our suffering to God, a request to God to alleviate the suffering,
Yeah.
and then last but not least, an expression of trust in God. So you
Yeah.
can see the movement right through
Mm-hmm.
those different aspects involves a psychological shift from distress to praise. So it
Yeah.
really is an act of faith,
Yeah.
and reading and praying through the Psalms of Lament help us to be shaped by that,
Mm.
help us to
Mm-hmm.
be shaped by, and to kind of move our experience is then interpreted by the words of the lament, and we helps us to feel the idea
Yeah.
of God's trustworthiness. And I think that's really what
Yeah.
it's designed to do.